with your hot seat.
Joined now with U.S. Senator John Kennedy. First off, thanks for being here. Happy
Thank you, Travis.
belated 4th.
You too, my friend.
All right, let's talk about the economy and inflation right now. Two big topics that you have been outspoken with. Is there a fix-all right now in Washington, D.C. when it comes to making life easier on all the people in South Louisiana watching this who are paying more at the gas pump, paying more at the grocery store, paying more for everything right now?
Well, it's hard not to notice that something's wrong in our country. I mean, inflation is gutting our people like a fish. Our national debt is greater than our national output. The border's open, crime's up, respect for institutions is way down, and about 70% of the American people say we're headed in the wrong direction. A lot of it, but not exclusively, is economy driven. To get control of inflation, we've got to do two things. The Federal Reserve, during the pandemic, printed about $7 trillion. It's got to wind that down. It's got to take the money out of the economy. It's doing that. Number two, the United States Congress, some was necessary, some wasn't, injected about $7 trillion into the economy. So you have all this extra money, this extra liquidity chasing too few goods. What Congress needs to do is live within its budget. I haven't voted for additional spending since inflation hit and don't plan to. Now, the only exception I might make is for defense, but we have a budget, and when we keep passing bills outside the budget, the new gun control bill, for example, costs $15 billion. There's another bill that we're going to be asked to consider soon that would appropriate $200 billion in subsidies to big tech to compete with China. All that is fueling inflation.
I don't want to pivot off inflation because it's such a big talker right now, but let's talk, since you brought it up, about the gun bill. You voted against it. Your counterpart, Bill Cassidy, voted for it. Why vote against that gun bill, especially in light of what happened in Uvalde, Texas, and just recently in the Chicagoland area?
Well, I voted against it for a couple reasons. Number one, we've got two mass killing problems in America. One mass killing problem is by the alienated, angry young whack job, usually, not always, but usually a young white male in his parents' basement who generally takes one of his parents' guns and kills a bunch of people. But the other mass shooting problem is in our inner cities. I mean, Chicago and New Orleans is becoming the same way, is the world's largest outdoor shooting range. And what I wanted to do was try to address both of the problems. I asked our negotiators why we can't try to do something about both, and they said, well, we can't do anything about the mass killings in the inner cities because it'll make the Democrats angry. And I said, well, that sounds like it's not my problem if they're angry. I mean, right now we're having a lot of publicity, as we should, about the mass shooting in Highland Park in northern Chicago. Further south in Chicago, last weekend, 60 people were shot by these gangs. 9 of them died. Nobody's saying a word about that. The second reason I voted against it is because of the red flag laws. There are no standards on these laws. Congress is giving mostly blue states a bunch of money so they can confiscate people's guns and then ask questions later, and I don't agree with that.
I mean, are they going to confiscate guns? I mean, it's my understanding, look, a lot of these shootings involved assault rifles that people can go buy legally right now. Why does a kid, let's just use the alleged shooter from Highland Park, why does a kid like that, who had some reported health problems, need to go buy an assault rifle? I mean, if you could just put the brakes on that, do you think it would be a trickle-down effect? Because I understand what's happening in places like New Orleans and Chicago, but it just seems like if you can eliminate assault rifles and weapons that are supposed to be used in war, wouldn't it have a trickle-down effect to other gun crimes?
Well, number one, how you're going to eliminate them without taking them from people. Number two, when a radical Muslim jihadist blows up a school and kills kids, we're always told, don't judge all Muslims by the acts of a few. And I agree with that. So why judge all ordinary and law-abiding Americans who own guns by the acts of a few? Point two would be this nut job that killed all the people in Highland Park. There were plenty of indications that he was going to do that. He'd been picked up by the police twice.
Right.
So how come his name went through the database saying it's okay for him to have a gun? I mean, my point is we have thousands of gun control laws. Illinois is one of the toughest states, has the most gun control laws. So how come it happened? You just can't pass a law to stop in a country that's free and recognizes the Second Amendment, that stops every bad thing happening in the world. I wish we could. But what you also have to remember is when you pass these gun control laws, you say, well, we're trying to get to the bad guys, but it impacts the good guys too. And so you've got to balance.
Let's shift gears, talk about another topic here, abortion. Obviously.
Can I just make one more point?
No, go ahead.
I've said all along that here's what we need. We don't need more gun control. We need more idiot control. And if it had been up to me, here's the bill I would have passed. I would have taken all the unspent COVID money. It's about $100 billion. I'd have taken a portion of that, given it to every school in America, and said, harden your schools. Now that would have slowed some of this down, but my colleagues didn't want to do that.
Look, it's a talk we could have probably for the next half hour right here. Let's talk about abortion. Obviously, trigger laws are going to take effect here in Louisiana. They're in effect except for the temporary restraining order that was put in place.
Right.
Where do you stand on that? Is this a step forward or a step back? And do you think it's going to impact midterms? You're up for re-election right here. Obviously, polls are showing that you're a heavy favorite against two Democratic challengers. Mm-hmm. But do you think this has an impact in the midterm election? A lot of people are upset, even here in Louisiana, which is a hyper-red state.
Well, first, I don't know how it will impact the election. I can't see the future, so I think I'm just going to wait for it. Number two, people who live in the West have been debating abortion for 2,000 years. I think most Americans have a moral compass, but sometimes on tough issues they land in different places. There's many Americans who believe that the fetus is just a clump of cells. There are other Americans who believe that it's an unborn baby. For 185 years in our country, states regulated abortion. Some states allowed it, most states didn't. Then the Supreme Court just invented the national right to get an abortion in 1973, Roe v. Wade and the Casey decision. All the Supreme Court did was say, we're going to send the issue back to the states. Why shouldn't the people of Louisiana have the right to decide the abortion issue for themselves? So if it's now in the hands of the people and the Louisiana legislature, you should talk to your legislature.
What does it say about the Supreme Court? Obviously one of the most conservative in the history of that court, that they actually undid a constitutional right for the first time.
Well, they overruled precedent. We overruled a precedent called Plessy v. Ferguson that said segregated by race public schools are okay. We reversed that with Brown v. Board of Education. Sometimes the Supreme Court makes mistakes. And I don't know a single fair-minded constitutional lawyer who has ever read, even those who agree with, who support abortion, who have read the Roe v. Wade or Casey v. Planned Parenthood decision and said it was any more than a rank case of judicial activism. They said abortion is in the Constitution, and it's clearly not. And so why not send it back where it belongs, to the states? And you will have different states approach it differently.
Right, as we do right now. Let's talk January 6th committee. Obviously, in a nutshell, is the committee doing good work in your opinion, or is this a partisan witch hunt?
Well, I want to be clear about this. I was there on January 6th. What happened was repugnant. If you look up the word repugnant in the dictionary, there's a picture of January 6th. And the people who broke into the Capitol need to be and are being prosecuted. The people who rioted the summer before, after the George Floyd murder, should be prosecuted. Without order, there is no justice. Now, I think what Speaker Pelosi is doing with the January 6th hearings, it's really more of a, a TV miniseries. There's no opposing point of view. There's no cross-examination. I get it. If I were as far down in the polls as Speaker Pelosi's folks are, I'd probably want to change the subject too. But I think that's the way most Americans look at it. And I think most Americans have already made up their mind about January 6th.
I think so too, but I think most people feel like it is good work. But there are, look, Liz Cheney's on the committee, Adam Kinzinger's on the committee. I mean, is it interesting to you when people say that Liz Cheney isn't Republican enough for Republicans when she has one of the most conservative voting records in Congress? And her father was essentially one of the architects of the modern Republican Party. How do people say it's partisan when she's the co-chair of that committee?
Well, I think it is partisan.
But she's a Republican. She's
a
conservative Republican.
But here's what I think, and here's what I think the American people see. First, everybody's entitled to their opinion. I have plenty of friends here in Louisiana and some in Washington that don't agree with me, but we're still friends. This is America.
Right.
You're not free if you can't express yourself.
Right.
But in a normal hearing, where you're trying to get to the truth, you have a balanced committee. You have people who can subject witnesses to cross-examination. You have an equal number of Republicans and Democrats. And in this case, Speaker Pelosi chose not to do that. Yes, she put 2 Republicans on the committee, but their minds were made up before they started. And I think it has affected the credibility of the committee. None of that is to condone, as I say, January 6th. It was horrible, but if you really want to get to the truth, you will subject the so-called truth to cross-examination. And I just think this is a political exercise.
Yeah, we'll see how it plays out in the midterms. Final question, DACA hearing happening this week at the courthouse 5 blocks from here. What is your stance on that? I know obviously immigration is a big talker clearly in this country.
We're not going to be able to address our problems with legal immigration, and we do have some, despite the fact that we welcome about 1 million of our world's neighbors to become citizens legally every year, more than any other country. But we're not going to be able to address the reform of our immigration system until President Biden will agree to seal the southern border. And the problem, I mean, as I say, this is America. You can believe what you want, but President Biden and his people believe that vetting people at the southern border is racist. I don't think so. I think it's prudent. Every country vets people coming into its country, but the Biden administration, I've been down there, Travis. It's wide open. It's wide open.
Let me ask you this question, because it's somewhat of a loaded question.
It's okay.
President Trump campaigned on building a wall.
Right.
That was supposed to solve this problem. That was not done. So I know that GOP members like to knock the current president and say it's a disaster. But there was a campaign promise that was broken from 2016. That wall wasn't paid for by Mexico, and it wasn't built. So does some of this fall on the former president as well?
Well, actually, the wall is built. I mean, I've been down there.
But if it's wide open, it's not built.
But it's the wall's not being enforced.
Okay.
The wall was never meant to stop all illegal immigration. That's why we had a policy called Remain in Mexico. That's why we gave the Border Patrol the authority to actually arrest and detain people. The wall can be used to channel people in a certain area, but once they come across illegally, they have to be detained and returned. There's one of 2 things going on with the Biden administration. I've seen it with my own 2 eyes. Either the Biden administration believes in open borders, or the person they have hired to run border security, you wouldn't trust to manage a glow stick, to manage a food truck. And I don't believe it's the latter. I think as a political matter, the Biden administration thinks, I've talked to many of the people, that vetting people at the border is racist. I don't. I think it's prudent. We'll have about 2 million people come into our country this year. We don't have the slightest idea who they are. Enough fentanyl came in last year to kill every man, woman, and child in America 7 times, and I don't think that's I don't think that's a prudent approach, and I don't think most Americans support it.
Yeah, I wish we could talk more about fentanyl. We can't. Really quickly, final question here, because it's a huge talker right now. You brought it up earlier. Crime in the city of New Orleans. We are setting records when it comes to shooting, carjackings, as well as our murder rate per capita. The mayor has been urged to call in the National Guard. She said she's not doing it. The governor said he's not doing it. In 2006, bringing in the National Guard after Hurricane Katrina may have not been a good look, but some people feel like it worked. You live in Metro New Orleans on the North Shore. What needs to be done? Because a lot of people feel, as goes New Orleans, as goes the rest of the state. What needs to be done to get a hold of this crime problem, with the exception of legislation in D.C.?
Well, we're having a serious crime, murder, let's call it for what it is, in New Orleans and in all major cities. It started with the defund and disrespect the police movement. Here's what I think you have to do short term. You have to empower your police. You have to pay them. You have to hire more of them. You have to stand behind them when they do their job. You do. You have to get rid of your hear no evil, see no evil, prosecute no evil district attorneys. And you're going to let the police do what they did, for example, in New York City a number of years ago under Bloomberg and Giuliani. And you're not going to get control of it overnight. Longer term, we have to ask ourselves a question. Why do so many of these young offenders, why are they more likely to grow up and go to prison than own a home or get married? There are a lot of reasons for that. You can't make parents take care of the kids, but you can improve your schools.
Right.
And
programs for kids, if they actually are arrested, would help too.
Yeah, and you've got to have no excuse schools. You've got to find out which of your teachers can teach and pay them, and find out which of your teachers can't teach and teach them how, or tell them to find a new line of work. You've got to stop social promotion. I think our rule ought to be, I don't care how old you are. You're not getting out of the third grade until you can read, period. Because I think every child can learn. I think you've got to expand charter schools. We've done a good job on that in New Orleans, but school choice and vouchers. And if you do that, you won't fix it overnight, but you'll go a long way to solving it over a decade, maybe less.
All right. Senator Kennedy, I wish we had more time to talk about all these issues. Unfortunately, we don't.
Thanks, my friend.
Enjoy your time in New Orleans.
Good to see you.
All right. Thank you very much.
If you want to share this hot seat or watch it again, you can do both starting tomorrow morning on WDSU.com. Let's take a live look outside now as we go to break at 10:46. Meteorologist